the direct way for us to recognize the silence of being is not by struggling with thoughts. It's a very common experience that many say that many thoughts come up and there is a sense of struggling with them. There is so much chatter. And when we take the attitude of we have to control the thoughts, or we wish these thoughts go away, or anything like that, they seem to come back with greater force. So the easy way, the direct way, is to paradoxically watch the thoughts with great interest, not to not the content of the thought in terms of what where the thought takes us, because if we identify with a thought, of course, as we all know, it can take us round the world, and there is no end to it. But if we also struggle with thoughts and try to suppress them, control them, it is like, again, the same problem in the opposite way, that it comes back with tremendous force. So the way out of this, neither to indulge in thoughts nor to control them, is to simply take the attitude of the source of these thoughts. And when we say source, it doesn't have to be something mystical. We don't have to even engage in any philosophical ideas, because as we know, the word is not the thing. If we if we have words like awareness or consciousness, those words are again thoughts that are there through knowledge. So the word is not the thing, and therefore they can be an escape. I can say that it is happening in awareness, but to say that itself is another thought. Instead, if we simply watch the thought, not to watch the content of the thought, but the source of the thought, in other words, to make it more concrete, if we look at any thought, every thought rises because of a certain identification that I have got. It is no thought appears randomly if we really look at it. Every thought has its own logic behind it because it is identified with some sense of I that I have taken on. So the inquiry, who am I? There are many who have even said that it's very abstract. What does it mean to say, who am I? So another way to approach this inquiry is to say, why is this thought coming? Or what is the identity that is having this thought? And that's a very concrete thing. We can see that there may be a thought that comes in service to an identity we have taken on as either a it can be a role in the family, it can be a role at work, or more subtly, it can be a psychological role we have taken on. It can be a, a fear based role, or it can be seeking validation, it can be seeking some kind of gratification, fearing criticism. So there are so many ways in which the ego takes identity, and each of these identity therefore brings about thoughts. So someone said it very wisely that nature doesn't act illogically. So everything is a movement of Prakriti, both the external and the internal. Everything we see outside. So in Bhagavatam, that's why it is said that Prakriti, not only our nature, Prakriti is the word for nature, and in fact, the word Prakriti itself, the beauty of Sanskrit is that every word, in its very word, has the essence of the meaning. Prakriti means that which is done perfectly. So kriti means to be done. Pra is a prefix that is normally for that which is done well. So nature is such a beautifully done expression of this supreme cosmic intelligence. And nature is not only external but also internal. So we see the beauty and the perfection of nature outside clearly. We see the mountains and the rivers and the flowers and the animals and even a blade of grass. Everything is growing with intelligence, animate and inanimate objects. But even internally, we have what is called four aspects of nature internally. They are called as uh, mind, intellect, memory, and ego. Mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. So the key revelation is that mind is also essentially matter. So we normally distinguish between mind and matter, and there is even expressions like mind over matter. But if you really look at it, mind is matter because mind is simply movement of matter. Even scientifically, it's proven now that what we call thoughts are simply movements of neurons, which are particles. So literally, scientifically, thoughts are matter, and this is what we can see that everything in nature, including thoughts, have intelligence behind them. They are not illogical, they serve a certain purpose. And if we understand the purpose they serve, then by the understanding it's finished. So the whole inquiry, in one way to see it, is to understand the source of thoughts. When we see a thought rising, we can see why this, we can, one way to ask the question is who is having the thought, which is the inquiry, who am I? Another way to ask the same question is what is this thought serving? What is the purpose of this thought? Then that shifts the attention away from the thought itself, because the normal tendency of the mind is to identify as the subject and then engage in the thought as an object and thereby get lost in the subject object duality, and then thought can take us in any number of ways, as we know. But instead, if we inquire into who is the subject, which may sound abstract, but in very concrete terms, the question is what is the role this thought is serving? So, because the subject is only a egoic identity for which this thought has come about. So, if we shift the attention to this question, then we can clearly see instantly what the thought is serving, whether it is a thought that's come to seek the egoic identity of any number of things, one that wants validation, one that has some fear, one that's carrying some memory of the past, one that's anxious about the future. So various ways in which this I takes different roles, and it can be instantly clear. And then in that very clarity, the thought and the role do not have any momentum anymore, and what remains is stillness, the ground in which the very inquiry takes place, where the thought comes up and the question, and through the question, the thought gets dropped, and the very question also gets dropped, and what remains is a very effortless stillness. We are not trying to then bring about stillness as a goal, but stillness is a natural effect, side effect of dissolving the thought into its source. So when we sit in silent meditation, as we do daily, and whatever times one people do, I know many do at different times. I'm sure many have their own ways of going into the silence. This is one way to approach the inquiry in a very practical way, to not have any sense of struggle with thoughts, to not condemn them, but to actually, first of all, recognize that thoughts, being part of nature, being part of Prakriti, have their own purpose. And unless the purpose is understood, they keep coming back. It's like a child that keeps coming to us, let's say, and if we keep ignoring without understanding why, then they'll keep coming back. So to simply ask thought to shut down may not work, but to simply run behind it, of course, we know is also not the answer. But to instead just the whole inquiry of who am I is essentially, in one way to look at it, is to understand, and this is not some psychological analysis we are doing, just an instant inquiry that immediately reveals what is the source of the thought, what is the purpose of this thought rising, which reveals the identity, the false identity that it is come to serve. And when it is seen, and when we see this identity, then it's very clear that that's not me, because it's just something that has happened, because the very seeing creates the distance between the apparent egoic identity and the seer, and thereby the false identity as well as the thought dissolves, and what remains is the silent seeing. And by and by, we can see that thoughts, there is not many thoughts actually. If we really look at it, we are all, in fact, somebody said, I read somewhere that people think the same thoughts every day. Um, so if we really look into it, we don't have that many thoughts, but we have, in terms of, we have many thoughts perhaps, but all of them are essentially recycling because they have not been looked into. So the way to silence, to the way to still the chatter of the mind, is to recognize that it is just a bunch of patterns that are constantly repeating themselves because of not being inquired into. And by inquiring into them with alertness in this manner, we can instantly be free of these patterns. And this alert awareness can then continue during the day too, when we are interacting with people or when we are doing work or whatever. The same pattern may come forth, and the more we catch it in silent meditation, we will easily catch it even during regular activities. And by, there is a stillness that is there through the day.